All right, welcome back to Turquoise Sky Spirits. My name is Megan Campbell. I am talking at you. So today I'm going to interrupt my normally scheduled monologue on the business to give you a new and exciting, meandering monologue on this new book that I just read. And it's really exciting to me for quite a few reasons. Now, first of all, as a former history major, when I was in college, I was very lucky to have found the value of books with a lot of references. Because I don't know if you know this about history or education in general, but if you can't back up your assertion, then you don't get to put it in a book or a paper or whatever you're writing. You have to be able to back it up. And in the liquor world, that is apparently not the case. So most of the books I read, they'll do things like, some even say that George Washington loved to butt chug Bud Lights on the weekends. But the history books are still out on that one. It's like, man, that is an assertion. Like, you saying that is telling people that this is a real thing. And you can't just be like, this is a real thing, but also we kind of just made it up. Like, there's all sorts of stuff like that in these alcohol history books. So this one was really refreshing in that it had the whole 9 yards. It had footnotes, it had endnotes, it had a bibliography that was like, what did I write? It had 14 pages of endnotes and a 3-page bibliography. That's fantastic. Not that I care or that I'm checking things, but like, they have them. Normally, it's literally just more or less like, hey, I heard this thing and I'm gonna tell you that. And that's how you get all these different misconceptions about alcohol out there that I'm sure you'll hear all about in other videos because I like to rant about things like that, and I get to correct things like that a lot in my particular line of work. So the other reason is because obviously as I'm opening a business right now, you tend to really evaluate other people's businesses and try to understand what was going on with them. And especially with the really successful businesses, the big guys, the dynasties. I mean, there's a Disney documentary out right now that's just fascinating to me, not because I ever want to open a theme park, but because Disney is a household name. And it didn't have to be. It could have gone wrong so many times. It could have fallen to pieces so many times, and it didn't. And you have to wonder why. And today I'm going to be talking about the king of vodka, Peter Smirnoff. And for the record, this is a lot of Russian names, and I am not Russian, and I've never actually spoken to someone who pronounces Russian things right, I think. That's not true, but it's been a long time, and I am no expert, so I'm probably going to mess up their names sometimes, but that's life. So I'm going to talk to you about the king of vodka, Peter Smirnoff, and his story, and how it became the household name it is today, both in Russia and here in the United States. And this is a disclaimer before we get started. Mom, Grandma, I am going to be cussing in this video because I'm a little bit hungover and I don't feel like watching my mouth. And I also think that stories like this are better with just a little bit. So, first of all, King of Vodka, Peter Smirnoff, written by Linda Himmelstein. A lot of it was taken from a book and a bunch of research put together by Smirnoff's great-great-grandson, He did a lot of work for a lawsuit. We'll get to that later. But he did a lot of work digging up the family's history and their past. So a lot of it goes to him for the credit. And then Linda Himmelstein put together this book. She did a wonderful job not only telling the story, but giving you context. Why these things happened. And I'm sure I'll talk about it more. A lot of the history revolves around Prohibition and how people were drinking at the time and how the government reacted to it and how they tried to stop people from drinking so much. So there was a lot of historical context that as an American I didn't know. And obviously, like, I studied history, so I know slightly more than the average person about history, and I didn't really understand a lot of what was going on. So she did a wonderful job of putting that in context. I'm going to drink this tea. I'm not going to drink that tea. It's still hot. Okay, right. So Peter Smirnoff is born very, very poor. And not just like, oh man, life sucks, like you're so poor, but he was born a serf, which, if you don't know, SERF is basically slavery, but not quite, right? So you're born on a certain plot of land, there's a certain guy who's your master, your ruler, whatever, and you are like tied to that land. But if you make enough money, and you do get paid like actual wages, if you make enough money and save enough money, there is a normal official system for buying yourself so that you're free. So in that way, it's not totally slavery, it's just mostly slavery. So he was born a serf. And one of the things that they could do as a serf was they could ask their masters, like, hey, can I go work in the city because I can make way more money there, and, you know, I'm smart enough and I'm good enough at stuff that I can be successful in the city. It's a waste of time to have me laboring on this farm. So his uncle first gets permission to go to city, starts up an inn. Inns are essentially bars where you can sleep overnight there. So he starts being successful. He opens a couple inns. Eventually his son comes, and eventually Peter Smirnoff comes and starts working at the inn. And he's like, oh shit, yeah, this is way better than farming. I'm so into running businesses and serving alcohol. I'm so into it. So he's like 14, 15 at the time. And he's so into it. He doesn't want to go back home, whatever. No, not in here. I'm talking. So he doesn't want to go back home, whatever. Eventually his uncle dies. The whole thing immediately falls apart. But he's got a taste for it. Shut up. Oh, get out. Get out. So he's got a taste for it. And I'm not editing that out. You guys can watch me beat up my dogs. Or we could just change the video and you can watch the dogs. Who wants to learn? There's dogs around. Rah, 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 rah. Yeah. Now you're on video. What, you're not going to do nothing? Nothing? That's what I thought. Shut up. Let me talk. Rude. Alright, so his uncle eventually dies. He's got to go back home. But he's got a taste for it, and his dad is like, ah, shit. Like, he could do pretty good at this. So we're going to have to do something about it. So another uncle is all the way in Moscow, and he's doing very well. So eventually his father is like, okay, you're cool. Like, you're really good at this. You're making a lot of money. I'm going to send you to Moscow. You can make money there. You can buy your freedom, whatever. Right? So he goes. He starts working. He's really into it. He's really good at it. Around this time, he marries his first wife. And then it turns out, in case you didn't know, when they're like, oh, you know, marriage used to last like your whole life and, you know, people never got divorced. Not true. First of all, your whole life could end, like, literally any time. It's like, ah, fuck, I got sick, I died, guess I'm gonna have to get another wife next year. It's not like, oh, until death do us part. Like, death was actually coming, more or less. It's like, nah, it'll be a couple years. We don't have to get divorced. One of us will die soon. So, he goes to the city. He starts working. And in case you didn't know, a big thing in Russia at this time was religion, as it was sort of a big thing in everyone's time. And we're talking about like 1850s is when this all starts, 1840s, 1850s. Religion is a big deal. Like, when you're in Russia, if you want to be socially accepted, you are part of the Orthodox Christian church there. It is a huge deal. Like, he had to get letters from his church saying he's been here his whole life, he's done everything right, he comes every Sunday, and then now it's okay for you to certify him in the city. Like, here's a letter from our small town church guy certifying you in the city, saying that you are a good Christian and you do what you're supposed to and you pay your money and whatever. So, there's also this thing called the Vodka Monopoly, which is exactly what it sounds like. Only the government can create and sell vodka. Now, other things, liqueurs, whatever, they're a little more lenient on. But if you know anything about Russia, you know that vodka is like a national pastime. Like, they drink it like water. They have to have it. And it's... I'm not making, like, gross generalizations. This whole book was about how every time they tried to take away vodka, the people revolted and burned down their government and said, don't you touch my fucking vodka again. So, there's this thing called the Vodka Monopoly, where the government makes the vodka, and then the distributors have to apply to this sort of lottery system to get the opportunity to distribute the vodka. They can water it down and proof it down and bottle it and sell it to people, and they earn the rights to do this. So it's this ridiculously corrupt system. Like, the end guy that gets to sell the vodka is bribing the farmer and the guy that the farmer sells to and the guy that guy sells to, like, all the way down the line. Everybody is getting bribed. Like, it's tripling the price of vodka, and these people are still making a ton of money on it. So it's a very lucrative business, and the government owns it. And I knew I should have highlighted, but that's fine. It's a very lucrative business, but soon enough, they're like, you know what? This is super corrupt. People are selling bad vodka. They're watering it down too much, which was a very, like, criminal situation. Like, if you were selling your vodka at 30% instead of 40% ABV, like, no, you suck. You are a bad person who is purposefully destroying Russian culture. Big deal. So eventually they are about to end this vodka monopoly. They are going to let it go public and people can start their own. But I'm jumping ahead of myself just a little bit. All right, so he moves to Moscow. He starts working. They sold vodka by the pail, the bottle, or a shtoff, which was 1.2 liters of vodka. Pretty hefty volumes that they sell back then. And a shtoff, right, so your 1.2 liters sold for $1.50, which is, like, I'd get drunk too if it was $1.50. Right, so he gets married. This woman named Nadezhda. She is the daughter of a clergyman. She gives birth to his first son. He dies 2 months later because back then in general, like, babies died a lot, and then, like, especially in Russia, it's like, nah, don't even, like, it happens. But he was sad because it was a son, and the firstborn son is a big deal. Right, so, then, in 1825, Tsar Nikolai the First... 1855, Tsar Nikolai I steps down, and Alexander II took control of the government from his father. Oh, I think they have performance anxiety. What? Get up. Get up, get up. Go. Shoot. Go. I'm talking. You're bothering me. Yeah, both of you. Shoot. Get. Get. Better. Not really. We're all going to miss the dogs. You don't want to watch me talk. You want to watch the dogs. I know. Alright, so Alexander II takes control from his father, and they had just lost a war, and he's basically like, fuck. We got so screwed in that last war. It was ridiculous. I mean, we just ate it. We're poor. We're not developing anything. We can't feed our troops. We're just behind in every single possible way. So he goes, all right, well, I'm going to think about releasing the serfs. No longer using serfdom, whatever. So during this time, the whole family buys their freedom. So right now, all the Smirnoffs are free. They are no longer serfs. They have moved to Moscow. And they are right at the cusp of this incredible new time in Russia. Like, they are poised to take off. So, Peter Smirnoff's father was a deeply religious man. He was also very, very smart. He knew how the game was played, and he knew that he had to play it. And he especially had to do it for his son. I mean, the guy's like 40 now, which in Russia is like you could keel over any minute now. Guy's like 40, and he's a little worried. He's like, my son is so... He can be so successful, and I need to set him up for that. So he buys his freedom. He goes to Moscow. He starts playing the class system. So in Russia, there are 3 levels of merchant guilds. And for the record, merchants are looked at on this time as like dirt. Like, you are just a shitty person who only exists to steal from your countrymen, and they were treated like Jews, which I don't know if you've looked at any history whatsoever, but that's never like a compliment. It's never a good thing. They were really looked down on. But a newly emancipated serf could get into the system. So there's the first class, which are your little guys. You can only hire like 25 workers. You can only make so much product. You can only make so much money. And you're not allowed to ride in a horse-drawn carriage, because Russia had like very rigid rules like that. So there's the first class, and at this point they go, okay, we are going to join the merchants, first class. We've got to pay our dues, whatever, pay our taxes, buy our licenses. It basically added up to like $40 to become a member, but it was pretty significant back then. State of vodka, 46%. Oh yeah. So in Russia at the time, before they abolished the tax farm monopoly, vodka monopoly system, 46% of the state's budget came from vodka taxes. So to give you an idea, like, imagine if in the United States right now, 46% of our tax money came from, like, bourbon alone. Like, the bourbon industry would be a pretty fucking big deal at that point. Alright. So, Right before they abolish this, peasant communities start to take oaths of sobriety. Not because they believe that drinking is wrong, they're like doing this sobriety thing to say, hey, you're charging way too much for trash. And that's what's important. So, like, this is kind of a culture shift. Here in the United States, we have this thing where it's like, oh, you're going sober, it must be because you believe that alcohol is bad for you and it's bad for your family. And it's not at this point. We're talking 1958 and 1959. They are not doing this because they think vodka is bad for them. They're doing it because they consider it to be a right. Every family, every household should be able to get the vodka it needs at a good price and know that it's safe and know that it's high quality. In May of 1959, they start to become violent. They attack drinking houses, whatever. Right around this time, Peter marries his second wife. His first wife died. Wives, they come and go. They also, in Tsarist Russia, you get older and your wives stay the same age. So he marries his second wife, daughter is born, she dies, so he's still got no kids. At this point, they take over a wine shop, a trading shop. Technically his father owns it, but basically it's Peter and his wife are running this. And he's about 23 right now. And this is the part that's really exciting for me because I've explained what I'm doing for my business in other videos. But basically what they do is they take the bread wine or the pure grain alcohol that's produced elsewhere. So in this system, you have plantations and they grow the crops and then they also distill it there on site in this like base wine, base spirit mixture. And then Smirnoff and his company would buy that. They would redistill it so that it's nice and pure, and they would, filter it and everything, filter it through charcoal. And then they would sell that, like, this is our vodka, we made it special. Like, the grains, whatever, like, no, that's not what makes it special. It's how we distill it, it's how we filter it that makes it good and makes it different from other people's. They specialized in flavored vodkas, so they would import all of this, import into the city, all of this fruit, all of these veggies and herbs and spices to flavor their stuff, and that was what made them special. And at their peak, they had over 300 different recipes for their nalikvas, fruity vodka mixes. So for everyone who's out there like, oh, this fruity bullshit vodka, like, that's not how it's done in Russia. No, that's actually specifically how it's done in Russia. That is their cultural drink. Like, they drink vodka because it's a part of who they are, it's a part of their diet, but the nalikvas and their liqueurs are more of their heritage. So he gets started, he's doing that, and they get their license. The Tsar, 1861, February 19th, the Tsar abolishes serfdom, and all aspects of vodka sale and production are available to all. So this is the perfect time. If you want to start a distillery, you are at the peak moment to do so. And this video is going to be like an hour long, so I guess if you made it this far, then you're probably into it, but heads up, like, take a bathroom break or something, I'm going to be going for a while. Okay, so, got his merchant's license, he's opened his place, he makes about 20 pails at a time, which is more or less 60 gallons, and this is all really cool for me, because this is basically exactly how I'm starting out. Like, this is my business model, is get the vodka or the bourbon or whatever and flavor it and then be like, hey, this is what I made. Look at what I made. Anise is one of their most common flavors, so that kind of black licorice flavor, very, very popular. They quickly earned a reputation for using better ingredients, for caring about the quality. He also ran his shop a little bit differently. Most vodka shops, they would more or less be like, all right, here's your vodka, go to town, do whatever you want, get wasted. Like, they were running them like really trashy pubs. And he was like, no, we might sell liquor, but we're good Christian men and we don't behave inappropriately in public. Like, he wouldn't overserve his customers long before that became anything a federal government cared about. So, 1868, January 26th, Peter Petrovich Smirnoff was born. That is his first son who would live to adulthood. So, he finally has a son. I'm pretty sure at this point he's also got a couple daughters, but in Russia, they don't really care about women at the time. They're like, oh yeah, I got 4 daughters. Oh my god, my son is born. Finally, I'm a father. So, women, they're not people. Okay, so, and then he makes this daring move, and he petitions the court to become a purveyor to the Tsar. And I mean, if you've ever heard of like Fabergé eggs, they're, just look them up. They're gorgeous. Like, at that time, Fabergé was a purveyor to the court. Like, you had to be the cream of the crop, the best Russia had to offer, or other countries. You didn't have to be Russian. But it had to be a superior product. And then there were like these basic rules. You had to be supplying the court for at least 8 years before you even applied for this. And at this point, Peter's literally just like, oh yeah, my shit's great. I'm having a good time. I really like what I do. And it would be like if I sent a letter to the President of the United States and be like, by the way, I want to be like one of the only 3 people who brings alcohol into the White House. And I got started like a few years ago. I'm pretty cool. People in Arizona know me. My mom buys my stuff. And I think it's worth it. Like, they're going to be like, no, what's wrong with you? What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, we don't know you. Nobody knows you. You haven't proven that you're great. And especially in Russia, we talked about that rigid hierarchy. It's like, he's literally one step above an actual slave. Like, congrats, you're no longer a literal slave, but you want to skip like all these different steps? Are you insane? No, you can't do that. So he is immediately shot down. They say, no, we don't know who you are, we don't know what you've done, and you haven't even fulfilled the basic requirements. So he goes, all right, challenge accepted. Like, now I have a new goal in life, is to become a purveyor to the Tsar, to the Tsar's court. So he goes, okay, well, what I need is social standing. And in Russia, you can buy social standing. Just a disclaimer, I'm talking about in Russia at this time. I am not speaking for Russia right now. I don't know what's up with them. I am not an expert in that. This is like literally right when the United States is like getting its feet under it. So obviously things have changed there since then. And we'll go through how much things have changed later on, because shit gets rough for this family. Right? So he thinks, all right, challenge accepted. I want to be a purveyor. So he starts racking up accolades. And one of the best things that you can do in Russia as a merchant is to donate to different funds, become a benefactor, a very public benefactor to different charities, stuff like that. Because it was generally considered that the more money you made, the more the guilt and the shame of making money weighed on your immortal soul. And the only way that you could assuage that guilt and make sure that you still got into the kingdom of heaven was by donating and doing everything you could to help your fellow man. So it was a big deal. You had to be a donator. So he started donating to different charities, different committees, helping beggars, helping orphans, stuff like that. He gets on the board of some charity, and it makes it so that he can wear this special like sash with this special little medal on it. And then eventually he gets on another board, which makes it so that when he goes to formal events, he can wear like this special, they use the word costume. So the way I see it is whenever you picture a stiff Russian aristocrat, whatever he's wearing in that picture in your mind is the costume that he's allowed to wear. So whatever that stereotype is, you nailed it. That's the one. The one in your brain is exactly what he's wearing. So he entered the first guild. His business is booming. In today's dollars, he's making over $7 million gross a year. He buried a couple kids in the meantime. They were just daughters, don't matter. Then he starts planning for this fair. The fair goes okay, but while he was there, his second son, Nikolai, was born, and his wife dies. The fair starts out okay, but then the stock market crashed in Austria, which led to like a global stock market crash. It was kind of like a domino effect. And then like typhoid broke out, and they're trying to have this fair, and it's not like nowadays fairs where it lasts a weekend. I mean, it takes like 3 months to set up the exhibits because they're literally building exhibits for this shit. And then it's like a 6-month long fair because you don't have cars or planes or whatever. Like, it takes you 3 months to get to the fair from where you are, and people coming from all over the world. So this fair is starting to be a disaster. His wife is at home, or his wife dies at home. His new baby son. Now, luckily, at the time, he didn't actually have to do any child rearing, so it's not like, oh my god, I'm a single father now. It's like, fuck, I gotta find the nannies and handle this shit. And more importantly, you can't be a respectable single man in Russia, especially not when you have children. Like, that was your duty to your children, was to have a wife who's gonna make sure that they're getting what they need. You know, who's gonna run your household. So he's in this pickle. He's starting to blow up. He's got these aspirations. Now his wife is dead. He's got these kids he needs to deal with. And he goes, I need a new wife. And he starts wife shopping because he's not looking for someone that he loves, strictly speaking. He's looking for someone who can get the job done. And he finds her. And it's inappropriate to marry within a year of your wife's passing. That's like an actual law. So a year and 2 weeks after his wife dies, he marries this new girl. Her name is Maria, and she is 16, straight out of school, and she's perfect. She's merchant class, but she was very well educated. She's very cultured. She can get them into those aristocracy classes. She knows what they need for you to be accepted into it. So she's perfect for the job. And also she's gorgeous and 16, and he's like 45 now. Like I said, he keeps getting older. His wives stay the same age. Okay. During this time, also his dad dies. So he's like kind of the patriarch, but not like full patriarch yet. Or sorry, his uncle dies, so technically his dad's the patriarch, and he is actually fulfilling the role because his dad is like 70 now. In 1875, February 7th, his third son, Vladimir, is born. So now he's got his 3 sons who will live to adulthood, or the 3 really important ones. He gets a couple more. Oh, he does an exhibition in America. He gets recognized for that. And then he finally gets his first seal on the Russian, on his label. So the way the Russian government works is the same way where he can like buy pins and accolades to make him more fancy and like move him up this ladder, like this very rigid social ladder. They work the same way with your seals and your certifications that you can put on your products. So when he won that award, he went to the Russian government and said, hey, Americans really like me. They think I manufacture stuff like super good and also that my stuff is tasty. So I think you should think that too. And the Russian government will, well, shit, all right, that sounds good to me. And so now he can use this one seal. They say, all right, your shit's real fine. You can use this one seal. So shortly after, he gets 2 gold medals in Paris. Huge deal. Russians, much like Americans, are obsessed with all things French. If it's French, then it's better than us, and we should aspire to be like them in every way. So he gets a couple gold medals in Paris. Really big deal. Russian aristocracy is like, all right, you cool. We cool. I like it. Let's see. Then his father dies. Now he's definitely the patriarch of the family. And here's where shit starts to fall apart. It's been really just an uphill, other than all his, the wife and children dying and the family dying. It's been really uphill for Smirnoff. Here's where stuff starts to get a little sticky. Okay, so state of the world right now. So the Austrian stock market crashed a while ago. Handled that. Kind of sucked, but whatever. Then there were poor harvests in Russia. And they don't really have alternative food sources. Then a government-backed bank in Moscow failed, which was the first time people were like, oh, stuff that the government runs can fail. Like, that's not good. It causes this huge panic. People are making a run on the banks. They're trying to get their cash out. In 1874, these intellectuals tried to they tried to start a coup, but what they did is they were like educated college students, and they like dressed themselves up as peasants, and they like moved into the peasant areas and like spread out, and they were like, hey man, like, how about revolution? Like, what do you think of that? Like, fuck the man. And all the peasants are like, what the fuck? What's going on right now? Like, no, guys, this guy's being really weird, and he's saying some shit, and I don't want to be a part of it. I don't know what's up. So they put that down pretty thoroughly, because these guys were not, like, they obviously stood out. It was super weird. It was a weird attempt. But it does sort of plant the seeds. So that's, like, the start of, like, ooh, hey, by the way, what if not this government? There's a couple factory strikes, irregular pay and excessive fines. So they could do this thing, right, where you show up to work and it's payday, and they put a notice up and they say, fuck you, I'll pay you next week maybe. So deal with it. And then next week would come and they'd be like, yeah, I changed my mind, so I'll pay you next month maybe, whenever. That's fine. You cool with that? And then they could also do this thing where if you showed up late, they're like, hey, that's $1. And then if you like didn't stand up when the boss walked into the room, it's like, that's $1. Fuck you. I'm keeping your money because you didn't stand up. Like, they had excessive fines. So every single thing, you know, if you had like the worst boss in the world and he's always like, oh, hey, I'm going to have to put that on my next report. It's like, instead of putting it on your next report, he literally just takes money out of your paycheck and says, go fuck yourself. And the people were getting tired of it. They were like, hey, that's a dick move. Also, they were working like 16-hour days. And in a time where usually when you're employed by someone, you actually live there, they were like providing them with really shitty places to live. Like, oh yeah, there's rats in that room, but like sleep on the floor, and I'll take $2 out of your paycheck and give you a single egg for breakfast, and you'll like it. So there's all these strikes, and they're fighting for new stuff, and they get a little bit of rights, and like the government is like, hey, come on guys, stop doing the excessive fines. You can't take more than like 5% of someone's paycheck, which is obviously we have different standards now. Now Smirnoff, another thing that I really like about him is he didn't run into any of these problems, because right from the get-go, he was like, look, if I treat you really well and people want to work here and I take care of you guys, then I'll have a better reputation and you'll work harder and you'll have skin in the game. You know, it's a philosophy that I believe in very much, is if you take care of people, you are going to get so much more out of them than if you treat them like crap and try to squeeze out pennies. I think there's some sort of saying about that, I'm sure. Alright, now all this stuff's going on. 1881, March 4th, the Tsar is assassinated in the street. Which was really unfortunate because he was probably the most progressive person they're going to see in a while. And his son, Alexander III, comes onto the throne. And he basically comes up to the throne and he says, you know what killed my father? Going easy on all of you guys. Fuck all of you. And he cracks down. He's like, nope. I'm done. There's no more reforms. You don't deserve like anything nice. I'm taking my ball and I'm going to my palace. So he cracks down, and at this point, vodka accounts for 30% of the state treasury. So still super high, but not the 50% it was before. Oh, 1881, Smirnoff runs his first ad. There's this whole Vodka Wars. There's very public newspaper, like, bickering going on back and forth, like, oh, he stole my label, and she's not really a Russian, and he doesn't go to church enough, but it's, like, full page in the newspaper, like, you know, John, fuck John, and fuck his vodka, and he's a dick, and also, like, mine's really good, so drink it. And it doesn't look good. And especially at this time, you're starting to see more people who are coming along and they're saying, you know what the problem is? Alcohol. Vodka. If the whole country stopped drinking vodka, we wouldn't have any of these problems. And then these newspaper ads are running and they're going, look, these guys are making crazy money. Like, they would literally change the world with how much money they have, and they're spending it to bicker back and forth in the newspapers, all this bullshit. Like, no, these guys suck. All of them suck. We don't like them. And their vodka is killing the people, and it's killing the Russian spirit. So, eventually Smirnoff's like, okay, hang on. We've gone too far. I'm starting to look like the ass here. So he pulls back a little bit. He's like, all right, we're not playing it that way. They start to have these decrees. Alcohol could only be sold in taverns with food. That should be very familiar to some people. It's a pretty normal thing in some states. In the United States, you have to serve food if you serve alcohol. And then 1885 into 1886, he petitions the court again. He's now been supplying them for years, and he succeeds. They formally make him a purveyor with all of the privileges, which is, you can use the state seal, you can put over your door, provider to the court. It basically is like, hey, all right, you can tell the whole world that we think you're the shit. And it was a huge deal. Smirnoff immediately redesigned all his labels. He redid the front of his house. He added a third story, and he had this big thing in the front that's like, Peter Smirnoff, purveyor to the court, and it had this giant seal. It was a big deal, and especially because a lot of Russians were illiterate at the time. So that was like a solid visual indicator. If you're looking down the line of vodkas, you go, oh, that one has the state seal on it. That shit's gotta be good. So, big deal. Let's see, formally declared. And right around the same time, the new finance minister is like, hey, by the way, vodka and tobacco monopoly would make us a shit ton of money. Just think about it. No big deal. Tolstoy launched a union against drunkenness. So now you're starting to get a real sobriety movement going. One where it's like, hey, it's not about the quality. It's about the fact that you're ruining my life slowly and poisoning me from the inside. And I don't like that, and I don't think you should be able to do that. He received the title of commercial chancellor. It's another vaguely meaningless Russian, step up the ladder. 1982, they did this whole thing where they were like, we are going to make Russia into a superpower by exporting a ton of food and a ton of grain to the whole world, and it'll be great because we'll have all this money. And then there's a poor harvest, and they exported all their food, and then they're like, wait a second, everyone's dying because we have no food because we exported it all, and now there's none here. So then the state ran into this oh shit, the people are starving again. We didn't think this one through. So there's some more riots, stuff like that. New minister is appointed because the last one ended up killing a bunch of people by starving them to death, and he is very pro Vodka Monopoly. So, and this is where we're starting to get into, right, if the last one was, I said before, I'm like, oh, it's all uphill, and then he starts to get a little squeaky, this is where we start going back downhill. Honestly, it's really shitty from here on out. So if you want to, not have that negativity in your life, then that's fine. You'll just never know what happens to the family. Spoiler alert. Oh, good. Okay, so 1894, the Tsar approves the monopoly, but it's a slow rollout. We're going to start way out in the middle of nowhere, where we're not making a lot of money, and we're going to start the monopoly there, and we're going to move it in towards the cities nice and slow so people can get used to it, so we can get used to it, make sure we're handling it right. Around this time, his kids start growing up, and as kids do, when you spoil them and give them everything they want, they start getting kind of shitty, right? So his oldest son, Peter Smirnoff, he sent him to St. Petersburg to run a business. He met this woman named Eugenia. She's married. It's this whole, son, don't, what are you doing? There's lots of women who aren't married. Please stop. But eventually she gets divorced. She marries Peter, and they have this daughter, Tatiana. And this is Eugenia. She's going to come up later. Oh, they restructured, right? So Peter Smirnoff is getting older now, right? He's starting to go like, okay, the monopoly's coming. My kids are getting older. They're starting to get into some shit. I need to make sure everything's set up because I could die at any minute. This is Russia. That's a real thing. So they restructured. They made the 3 oldest sons. No, just kidding. They made Peter, the oldest son, part of the restructure. So now he's a stockholder. And then, notably, Nikolai and Vladimir were left out. They were not made part of this thing. And it's because Nikolai was unstable, neurotic, drunk, and just an all-around fuck-up. Like, this kid is running wild. Like, he might even have had some kind of undiagnosed mental disorder. Like, the dude was not there. And then Vladimir, the 3rd son, he just loved being rich. He just wanted to be rich and happy and sexy and part of the aristocracy, and he just didn't really care how much it cost or where the money came from. So he is just spending and spending and spending and going out with women and gypsy singers and stuff. Like, his dad even sent him to China because he was like super in love with this gypsy lady, which, if you know anything about history, gypsies also not exactly treated respectfully. Not the pinnacle of the totem pole there. So, November 1st, 1894, the Tsar dies unexpectedly, and Nikolai II ascends to the throne. He's very young. The guy's like 18, and everyone's like, we don't know what's going on right now. Like, this could really go anywhere. He's a thoughtful young man. He's not a bad young man, but he's still young. Like, an 18-year-old in charge of Russia is kind of a big deal. Oh, God. I don't normally talk this much, so it really takes it out of me. Okay, so they restructure, the Tsar dies, the trial vodka monopoly run is ridiculously successful. I mean, they are raking in the money, and in addition to the vodka monopoly, right? So nobody else can make vodka, but you can still make your other spirits, your grape wines, your fruity vodka mixes, stuff like that. But 15% of your profits automatically go to the government on those. So they're still raking in dollars, even from the stuff that's not vodka. But it's starting way out. They know they have a few years. And then, let's see. And they make so much money that the government is basically like, well, shit, why wait? Like, let's scoot this timetable up, man. Like, this is going great. Drinking is down. We're making way more money. The quality is great. Nobody's complaining. Like, it'll be perfect. Don't worry, bro. I got this. So they're still rolling out. Basically, at this point, the Smirnoffs are thinking that their best bet, right? They can't avoid the vodka monopoly. They're not going to get like an exemption. But if the government chooses their recipe and their style of making things, then they'll continue to function. They'll continue to work just for the government instead. So that's kind of what they're hoping right now. Like, we can't run from this, but we can be the best, and therefore the government will choose us and we won't be, like, blown into obscurity. Oh, his daughters start getting wild. Well, most of his daughters marry, and it's like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. His youngest daughter, Alexandra, is kind of wild. She becomes infatuated with this playboy, married man. Oh, Nikolai and Vladimir both married women that they hated so that their father would be happy. That works out really well in the end for everybody involved. And then the two younger sons, Alexei and someone else, the two younger sons are then added to the board. He is like, I'm gonna die soon. So he starts resigning all his posts, whatever. He dies in 1898. And then it wouldn't have been that bad, right? Because he divided up his stuff. He said, okay, my wife and my 5 sons get, like, they're equally dividing all of my shit. And then my daughters get, whatever, and my workers get some stuff too. But he divided all of his stuff. It's my wife and my 5 sons, and then my wife will handle stuff until she dies. And everyone was like, all right, cool. Like, that checks out. No big deal. The sons cannot receive their shares until they're 35. I think the oldest is 27 right now. And they're like, all right, cool. That works out. That checks out. No big deal. And then the next year, it's like 6 months later, his wife Maria dies of meningitis. And that's when shit really hits the fan, right? Because now you've got these playboy millionaires who don't really care about their father's business, who have been raised in this aristocracy. I mean, they have had money flowing since they were little kids. And now they're off the leash. There's nobody to tell them what they can do, what they can't do, who they should marry, who they should spend time with. So they start going nuts. Nikolai is drinking again like crazy. And then Vladimir is, betting all sorts of money. He loves horse racing. He loves horses. So he's like just dropping money at the horse races. Sergei was the younger son. So his younger sons, Sergei and Alexei, they have to have guardians appointed to them because they're still underage. And then they start this whole, like, it's sort of okay at the beginning, but then the family starts to splinter almost immediately over the money. The older kids start awarding themselves, like, bonuses, even though they don't do anything, which is pretty par for the course. So the older 3 start awarding themselves bonuses. They start mismanaging the affairs of the younger ones. They start increasing the shareholder payout. So instead of the extra profit at the end of the year being reinvested into the business, it goes to the shareholders, which are the 5 brothers. So they're just like, we need more money. We need millions of dollars every year to spend on jewels and horses and whatever shit we want. All right. The Monopoly, not going quite as well as they'd hoped. Right, so the idea was they were trying to sell it as, we want to help you stop drinking. Drinking is bad for the Russian people, and we want to help you guys stop. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it not fun. We're going to make it not cool. So the same way like cigarette packages in places have the lung cancer poster on them, or the lady with the thing cut out, to make it like not sexy, and then you have to have plain packaging. That was kind of their idea. So all of the pubs, they're like, no, we're closing the pubs, we're taking them over, and instead of being a fun place to hang out and drink, what we're going to do is we're going to make it lame. So it's like white walls. The only thing that's in there is like a picture of the Tsar and a cross, and there's like a window with glass, and you just like, here's your money, here's your vodka, all right, get out, like no hanging out here. So they thought this would mean that, people would get their vodka and they would go home and they would drink in moderation with their families and realize that they love their wives and children and want to be home all the time and stop drinking, because they didn't really think about it that hard, and that's not how humans work. So instead, what happened is people would get their vodka and they would go drink in the street right outside the vodka shop. And also they went from like 300 places to buy it to 60 in the city. So there's these ridiculously long lines of people waiting to get vodka. So they're in a bad mood and it's not fun for them and they're wasting their paycheck on it. So it didn't look good. It was very easy for people to walk down the streets and go, oh, look at all these sad souls waiting in line for their poison, and then this is what happens when they walk out. There's dudes laying in the gutter, like, just completely wrecked because they drank a pail of vodka in a night. So it really fanned the fires of, like, look at what vodka does to people. Like, look at what you're doing. And the government is making a shit ton of money on it. So they're like, oh my God. Like, it was one thing when private companies, we could be like, oh, look at the Smirnoffs and these shitty people making money on their lesser man and making money on poisoning the people of Russia. And now they're going, look, the government is making money poisoning us. Like, they are making fucking money, dollars, killing us, and we're lying in the streets and they're not doing anything about it. And it doesn't help that, you know, the difference in Russia is overwhelming. I mean, the bad parts are horrible. They're gross, they're disgusting, it's miserable and gray, and everyone looks so sad and depressed. And then the good parts are sparkling jewels that still, like, even today, people go to Russia and they're like, oh my God, look at this gorgeous opulence. Like, look at the shapes and the structures and the colors, and it's beautiful and it's sparkling. And can you imagine being that drunken, poor, like, oh, I finally got my paycheck after like 3 fucking months, and I spent it on this vodka that's more expensive because of you guys, and I'm gonna sit here in the street drinking myself to death because I have nothing better to do, and I'm gonna look over there and see you throwing this absurd, lavish party with imported shrimp and caviar and fine Parisian cognacs and shit. Like, no. It was getting tense. It was getting very tense for a very good reason. And then the Tsar's not helping, right? Because he's still on that same page as his father, where he's like, you know what? The people need to calm them down is a good spanking. Like, that's what you guys need. You need to know good Russian discipline. If I treat you like the children you are, you will learn and eventually grow up to be men. So he's cracking down on protests. He's sending men into the Red Army, right? So he's got this brilliant idea. Like, if I find out that you don't like me, I'm going to send you to the army, where they're going to teach you discipline, and they're going to teach you order, and they're going to teach you how to shoot guns really good. Like really good. And that doesn't backfire at all. Except for the part where over the next, 6 years, 300 Russian government officials are killed, assassinated. But that's not a big deal. Right, 1902, shit starts getting real in the family. They cut out the youngest sons. They kind of undersold a lot of property. They're like, oh, hey, this property is yours. We're going to sell it for you, and we're going to give you the money, and that's your buyout from the company. And the younger brothers are like, fuck you guys. You're just trying to cut us out from the real profits. But they're 18, so nobody cares. Nobody's listening to them. They dissolved Peter Smirnoff's business, right? So the the setup that they had before. They completely dissolved it and they started a new one. And the younger brothers filed this lawsuit and they're like, look what they did. They literally just dissolved the business as it is. They set up a new business and they bought everything from the old one at a fraction of the price. So they made a shit ton of money that they're not sharing with the younger brothers or anybody who's involved. But it's an ongoing lawsuit. Nobody really cares that much. And either way, they're spending the money too fast for anyone to really do anything about it. Nikolai is thoroughly off the rails. He makes these lavish presents to his wife. He's like going around town with women and like showering them with gifts and jewels and stuff. Like, he's at the point where you could literally walk up to him and be like, hi, my name's Joe. Can I have $1,000? Because I want to bet it on that horse over there. And like, it's a winner. I swear to God, it's a winner. And Nikolai will be like, that's a great fucking idea. Like, here you go. Here's the money. Let's do it. And then like wander off. And he's just like, yeah, fuck. So he's getting taken advantage of a lot. And then he's like trying to get attention from his wife. And this is where you start to get into like, is some other shit going on here? Because at one point he like faked a suicide attempt where he literally like painted the top of his head and like painted the roof and like made it look like he shot himself. So she would walk in and be like, oh my God, he shot himself. And, you know, she'd feel bad. And I don't even know what he wanted because he didn't want to live with her. He didn't want to be in love with her anymore. He just wanted attention. And she was like, nah, go fuck yourself. Like, you're crazy. Like, you're nuts. And I just want money and I want you to leave me alone. Right? So he's openly courting this woman named Natalia. She is shamelessly, like, draining his bank account. She's also like a literal prostitute. Not like, oh man, that, you know, red woman, like, don't get with her. She's no good. She's a literal prostitute, and he is making it rain on her. So he was then ruled incompetent. His brothers got together and they're like, we don't know what's wrong with him, but like, he's fucked up. He cannot be trusted on his own. He just can't be. So he's put under guardianship. He's given like an annual, you know, this is how much money you're gonna get. Don't ask for more. Like, you're not allowed to write any IOUs. Obviously, he continues to write a bunch of IOUs, so it's like a whole thing. Vladimir, right, that's the third son. He does this big public, right, so he's met this other woman. He's living with another woman and his son in another townhouse. And one day he is walking through the garden with some friends and his wife happens to walk by and she doesn't say anything to him. So he sues her and says, you know, you disrespected me in front of my friends and that's bullshit. Like, you're not allowed to do that because I gave you a house and I gave you a bunch of money and you have to give me that stuff back because you disrespected me in front of my friends. Somehow conveniently forgetting that, like, living with another woman and like publicly going around and being like, this is my girlfriend, I love her, she's great, my wife sucks, is like somehow not disrespectful. So he doesn't win that. He looks like an ass, and this is all happening like in the public eye. I mean, it's a very Kardashian situation. Like, the whole, if social media and reality shows existed back then, like, the Smirnoffs would have had their own show. And it's like, oh my God, what's he doing this week? They're a disaster, and the press is all over it, and it looks terrible. I mean, it's very much, like, right to the point where, you know, all these people, Tolstoy and all of them, are right now arguing, like, look at what vodka does. It eats the soul. It drains the spirit. It makes you a bad Christian. And the Smirnoffs are out here rolling in dough, making it rain on whatever they want, very publicly, acting like asses. I mean, this is a 30-year-old dude suing his estranged wife because she didn't say hi to him in public. It's ridiculous. So a lot of bad press. And I think it's really important. Like, I'm not just saying this because it's fun and exciting and we all like to talk about gossip, even if everybody's been dead for like 200-300 years. But because it's going to come up later. Like, the fact that this is all so public and they're so extravagant and they're so lavish is going to come back to bite these people later. So he sued his wife, and then Russia got into a war. Japan attacked their eastern fleet. They thought it was going to be like no big deal, like whatever, we'll roll over them. And they don't. Like, they get fucked in this war so bad. It's miserable. Russia is the laughing stock of the international community for how they respond to this war. So, and during this time, the economy stalled, there were jobs lost, the vodka monopoly is under fire. People are saying you are poisoning the people to make money, to fund a war that you can't even fight and that we shouldn't even be in. So people begin to boycott liquor, and they begin to destroy the liquor shops, and they accuse the government of poisoning the people to make money. So in 1905, a peaceful walkout, they're doing a peaceful march. They're going right up to the gates where the Tsar wasn't even there at the time. So, like, this shouldn't have happened. But they're doing a peaceful march. They're going to go right up to the gates and they're going to say, you are going to stop making money on poisoning us. Like, you're going to stop treating us this way. This is inhumane. It's not right. We won't do it anymore. And one of the guards panics, and he gives the order to open fire. And that eventually becomes known as Bloody Sunday. So the streets of Moscow are just washed in red. There's people killed there. Once the news gets out that they opened fire on this peaceful protest, there's protests all over. People are going nuts. Over 1,500 government officials were killed during these riots. And then the Smirnoffs, right, because they've got this big government symbol that they've made a really big deal out of for like 20 years. They're like, look how close we are. Like, oh, the Tsar loves my shit. Like, we're great. We're buddies. They've made a big deal out of it. Well, now it's coming back to bite them in the butt. They have the state symbol right on the front, and the state is the one that's poisoning the people, and the Smirnoffs are poisoning the people. Vladimir, that's the third son, he's physically attacked, like, in the streets twice, like, dragged out of his carriage. He was kind of lucky to survive both of them. And it doesn't change what he does. Like, he gets a permit for a gun, and that's what changes in his life. He's still living ostentatiously. He's buying a house, big, gorgeous houses for his girlfriend, and who's an actress. So, Nikolai's still going nuts. Let's see. And then here's an important part. 1905, Nikolai and Vladimir both sell their shares to Peter. Now, Peter's been the only one that's like, okay, you can reasonably take on in your father's footsteps. Like, you're a solid, level-headed dude. You know what you're doing. You care about it. So they're both like, no. Nikolai's insane. Vladimir doesn't want anything to do with it. So they sell their shares to Peter, and they're like, we're out. We're good. We've made enough money on this. I think we'll be okay. And Peter makes his wife, Eugenia, God, I hate that name. Peter makes his wife, Eugenia, a board member, which means she is officially part of the board. And that's going to be important later. And there will be a quiz. So, 1905, October Manifesto, they demand their freedoms. There's drunkenness everywhere. The state is profiting on it. And then Peter sort of starts up the first Russian lobbying company. And he starts really trying to get the government to get rid of the vodka monopoly. And it's a really delicate process because there's all this hate right now, and he sort of has to guide it. He's like, yes, the situation is bad, and he has to guide the discussion into, if this were a private enterprise, this would not be the problem. And he's got to fight for it because a lot of people are saying, if you got rid of vodka, this would not be a problem. And he has to be like, no, don't do abolition, don't do prohibition, like, we just make it private again, like, we'll just get the government out of it and that'll fix things. So he's trying really hard. And younger brother's doing shit, no big deal. Vladimir moves to St. Petersburg. He meets this girl, Valentina. She's got a long-ass Russian name that is not happening right now. Yep. He's going crazy. He took his son. There's this, like, public custody battle. He took his son from the wife, his second wife, that lady that he was living with. I know, it's a tangled disaster. Read the book. It'll give you the full stories. But it's a hot mess. If we had tabloids today, it would still be a hot mess. People would be like, wait, what the fuck's going on now? But importantly, 1910, the middle of all this shit's going on, and Peter suddenly dies at the age of 42. So all of this lobbying, right? They've got this group together who talks to the government, and Peter was the one who was heading that up. And suddenly he dies, and nobody really steps up to fill that void. So you start to get your prohibitionists. Now there's no voice saying, if only we go back to the capitalist way, like, don't worry, it'll be fine. There's no voices arguing for that anymore. It's all prohibition. Like, if you get rid of vodka, we will be a successful nation again. I think it's really important to understand that they believed that from the bottom of their heart. Like, if you get rid of vodka, like, families will be whole again. The prisons will be empty. Life will be good. We will be a strong nation again. So that leaves Eugenia in charge of the Smirnoff Empire, which is still pretty sizable. Like, they've still been making their fruit vodkas and their grape wines and brandies and stuff like that. They're still successful. They're still worth calling an empire. Just not the same way they were before. So in a fit of utter insanity, instead of leaving the very capable managers in charge or promoting somebody who knows what they're doing, she leaves her 16-year-old son in charge of the company while she remarries some Italian diplomat and, like, fucks off to Japan. She's like, ooh, yeah, he'll take care of it. See ya, I'm out, like, I'm gonna go have fun. Like, she's just that kind of woman. She doesn't like, do anything. She never wanted to work a day in her life. So she leaves her 16-year-old son in charge, who promptly fucks up some negotiations and loses them the rights to their 3 of their 4 seals, right? So we talked about earlier, it was a really big deal when he got that first seal of the state. Well, now at this point they had 4. Technically, when they dissolved the original company by Peter Smirnoff, they lost all of the rights to say they were a purveyor to the Tsar and to use those 4 seals. And they were in the process of getting sued, and what Peter was gonna do was he was like, okay, we'll take 1 seal off and we'll, like, tone down the whole purveyor thing. And they were ready to negotiate, and they were like, okay, that'll be fine. But instead, this 16-year-old dickbag is like, no, fuck you guys. We do what we want. You can't tell us what to do. So then they lose the right to use 3 of their seals. So it sucks. It was a really, really poor move. Yeah, they were stripped of 3 of the seals, and they only barely kept the 1 seal and the purveyor title. And then, this kid's name is Arseny, by the way. And then he starts getting weird. Like, he's behaving erratically, as any recently abandoned 16-year-old in charge of an empire would. I don't quite begrudge him that. But he starts spending like crazy. When his mom steps in and was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you're going off the rails. He sues his mother for not giving him a large enough allowance, and for trying to hinder him, basically. And the court goes, okay, this shit's weird. So they appoint him a guardian, which I think is really weird because he has a mother. I would think that would be like, no, you have a legal guardian. It's your mom. Like, what the fuck? But whatever. They appoint a legal guardian. Eugenia is like out of here, whatever. And the business is being run by power of attorney, which is honestly what should have happened in the beginning. Oh, a little kidnapping. Exciting stuff. Regime continues to degrade. Rasputin enters the picture. We all know the story about Rasputin. He's just this foreigner who comes in, and the royal couple is just like, oh, you're great. You're our best friend. And he's like dirty and gross, and he's like everything that the aristocracy doesn't believe in. He doesn't have any of the normal like rankings, all that shit that Peter Smirnoff worked so hard for. He doesn't have any of it. He has no standing, and he's a foreigner, and he's, well, not that they mention it in this one, but, like, he's just like, oh, you got a problem? Put leeches on that shit. It'll work. It'll be great. So everyone's feeling very uncomfortable. The start of World War I was actually like, maybe this could work, right? So things are getting real shaky. Everyone's feeling nervous, and then World War I starts, and they do a temporary prohibition. They're like, we have been the laughing stock of the entire world because every time our armies go to march and they go somewhere, they're drunk. They are completely wasted. Like, there's cartoons about the Germans, like, marching in, and all the Russians are just, like, drinking in their tents, and the Germans just roll through, because that's what it was like. So they start this temporary prohibition, and it goes great. Like, they mobilize their troops in a third of the time. They get out there, and everyone's feeling good, and there's this wonderful, like, pro-Russia sentimentality, like, no, we're gonna fight those Germans, and we're gonna win, and it's gonna be great, and don't you worry about anything, like, Mother Russia is back. And then it wasn't. So they get to the war front, right? And everyone's feeling really good. And somehow along the way, they didn't quite account for the fact that one in every 3 Russians didn't have a gun. And the guns that they did have were like these old school, like where you gotta like pack the powder in. Like, they were 30 years behind the rest of the world in terms of fighting technology, and like half of them don't even have shoes, and it's all mobilized peasants, right? So people who have been farming, like, they don't have a Russian military. They just have so many people to throw at the problem that they think it'll work. And before, it did work. For most of Russian history, it was like pretty okay. But the rest of Europe has moved on, and we've created these mass killing machines, and Russia's still over here like, I'm gonna stick them with the pointy end. It'll work. I've got 3 million people to do it, and it isn't enough. So at this point, they've got 1.4 million men in the Russian army. Eventually, over the course of the war, they had 15 million men, individual people. That's how many people they have. It becomes very clear very fast that they are not ready. They have no leadership, they have no technology, they are untrained, they are poor, and then soldiers, right, because they want to drink, because not only are they Russian, They live in Russia, and that makes you want to drink. But now they're Russian on the front lines with no shoes, no gun. They don't know when they're going home. They know for a fact that their generals are completely incompetent and have no idea what they're doing. And on top of it, they don't have any vodka. So then they start drinking alternatives, like furniture polish and varnish and like anything with any alcohol that they can get their hands on to just make it stop. And then Nikolai gets this bright idea, that's the Tsar, and he's like, you know what they need? Leadership. They need a man at the helm to tell them what for, and I'm the man for the job. So he goes out to run the war, like, from the front. While he's gone, obviously shit keeps getting worse, right? For a brief moment, though, I will say, for a brief moment, when they mobilized all the troops and there was no alcohol, it was actually quite nice. Because, like, the drunkenness was down significantly. I mean, they were talking like, oh, the drunk tanks are empty, and we haven't had people, it was like an 85% drop in how many court cases they had, and it was all drunkenness. And then that also could be attributed to the fact that they shipped all of the eligible young men out and sent them to the military. So it could be that a lack of alcohol solved the problems that they thought it would solve, but it also could be that if you just get rid of all of the people who are drinking, then you're left with people who won't get drunk in the streets. Just throwing it out there. So he went to the war. Tsarina was left behind to rule, with Rasputin as her advisor, which we've already established the Russian aristocracy thought was a terrible idea. So he gets killed. The Tsarina is inconsolable, basically her best friend. There's the wounded and the crippled are coming in from the war. There's not enough hospital beds. They're just laying in the streets. They're finding alcohol. They're getting drunk. And on top of that, there's a famine because the crops are bad, and it's one of the worst winters that they've had in like 50 years. It's a disaster. Like, literally, when Nikolai gets home, he's like, I do not know this city. I do not know this place. This is awful. Like, this shit sucks. And on top of it, right, so we talked about earlier, like, paint this picture in your mind like you're a Russian peasant and you're drunk and they're having this glittering ball, and it's very frustrating because you know that you can't be that person. Now, that was 10 years ago, and nothing has changed. The aristocracy has not changed one little bit. Like, now, right, you're this Russian peasant, you've just come home from a war where you didn't have shoes, you didn't have a gun, you got your leg blown off, you're sitting in the streets drinking fucking nail polish so that you can just stop feeling something, and you look over and those same aristocrats are still throwing their parties. They are still importing these delicious, like, French caviar, they're still great. They're like, yes, life is fine. What are we worried about? We have so much money. It doesn't matter if the prices on everything triple because of the war, because, yeah, whatever. We'll just pay it. It's fine. I want it, so I get it. So it's getting even more tense. So February 23rd, 1917, there's this Women's Day strike, and it goes on for a day, for 2 days. The next day, the leaders of the general communities are like, this is the real thing. This can get real. So the Lenin arrives, and the Bolsheviks start leading this drive. They're like, no, this is a real revolution. Nikolai II he abdicates, and he's like, I'm out. I can't win. I'm done trying. And a provisional government is established, right? Lenin arrives. Bolsheviks are like, hey, we're the only ones with answers, so maybe you should listen to us. Everyone, it's not an easy transition, obviously, right? So there's this provisional government who's likely made up of like generals and people who still had skin in the aristocratic game. And then the Bolsheviks show up and they're like, hey, we should be in charge. Like, end the provisional one, put us in charge. This will be great. And what the government does is they publicly spread this rumor. They say, hey, we caught Lenin and Trotsky and other major leaders. Like, they're not for you guys. They're for the Germans. They're German spies. And they're trying to get, like, infiltrate you and turn our country over to Germany. And obviously they're still in the middle of a war with Germany. Tensions are very high. And the Bolsheviks turned on him. And, you know, Trotsky was imprisoned. Lenin escaped. Whatever. Over the next 6 months, obviously the government doesn't get any better. Like, they're not doing any better. They're still weak. The Germans are approaching, and the only people who have any answers, who have a plan to put forward, are the Bolsheviks. So about 6 months later, they go, okay, hey guys, come back, whatever. They secretly infiltrate, and it's like an overnight thing, where they literally are like, oh, all the generals are in that room. Let's just sneak in and take all the generals hostage, and then like demand that they turn it over. So it was a very quiet coup. Literally, like the next morning, they put up posters and they're like, hey, by the way, we're in charge now. Like, we won. So heads up, there's going to be a new sheriff in town situation. Everyone's a little nervous about this. Obviously, it's a pretty big deal. First thing they do, like any good government, is create the secret police. I guess they create the secret police, they start cracking down. And they are generally of the opinion that if you made vodka, and if you were a merchant, and if you were wealthy in any way under the Tsar's rule, then you were an enemy of the state, and you were an enemy of the people, and you deserve to die. Because you have been feasting yourselves on the heart and soul of Russia for years. And this is where you start to see the Smirnoffs really get screwed because they've been very public. They're the biggest name in vodka in Russia. And obviously these Smirnoff children have been living it up, doing what they want very publicly, like degenerate. They do not represent the values of the Bolsheviks, and they do not represent the values of a good Christian or a good Russian in any way, shape, or form. So, generally, they get screwed. Eugenia leaves Russia. Vladimir runs away to, like, this hot springs place. He lives there for, like, a year before he gets captured. He spends some time in prison. He escapes from prison. He and his actress girlfriend flee the country. And that's where he starts going, okay, I have nothing but my name. His prize horses, his studs were murdered in the takeover. He wanted to be part of the theater scene. He wanted to be known as like a writer in the theater scene. Obviously, he never got to that point. He never made that happen, so he couldn't rely on that. Like, everything that he had done was essentially hobbies, and the only thing he had that was, like, money maker was his name. And, by the way, during this whole time, like, generally any remaining living Smirnoffs are having a really shitty time because of their last name and their affiliation, so even like 5 years, 10 years down the road, they're like getting picked up and they're like, oh, you're a Smirnoff, like, so you hate our government and you deserve to die, right? Like, a dude was sentenced to 5 years in prison for thinking impure or unsupportive thoughts about the government, essentially. So, but Vladimir's the important one. So, right, Vladimir, third son, sold his shares years ago, and he escapes. He gets into Constantinople with only what they could carry. And the two of them try to start up. Vladimir starts a small vodka manufacturing with his family's recipes and whatever. And it's not the worst. It's not terrible. But the problem is that they didn't really drink vodka in Constantinople. So the people he was selling to were all the Russian refugees. And if you know anything about refugees, it's that they don't have a lot of money to spend on anything, and certainly not on vodka. Like, they just don't have anything. It's a very bad niche market to hit because they're all coming here poor. And most of them don't even have a name worth selling the way that the Smirnoffs do. So they're in Constantinople. Vladimir's girlfriend eventually does a play that's successful enough that the tax man comes to the door and says, hey, here's the tax bill for what we think you've made, and it is well beyond what they have to spend. And they're like, that's impossible. So they run away again. They've spent like a year or two in Constantinople. They run away again. They get into Bulgaria. Yeah, they get into Bulgaria. It's a lot more friendly. His girlfriend meets another wealthy man who's very stable, and she leaves Vladimir. So now he's lonely and heartbroken and still very, very poor. And he doesn't know if his family is alive. He doesn't know if his ex-wife and his kid is alive. He doesn't know if his brothers are alive. It's not a cool situation for him. But he sets up another factory, and he starts making money. There's a lot of former Russians there. He does a little better. In Bulgaria, they do drink vodka, and they sort of know his name, so it's working out pretty well. But his girlfriend leaves, and eventually after a few months, he finds a buyer for the factory, and he sells the factory and the name and the rights and everything. And he goes to France. He goes to Paris. Obviously, we talked before, Russians have a big love affair with Paris. So he gets there, and that's where he sort of formalizes this idea. Like, we'll create a company that just sells the name, the recipes, the rights, and everything like that. So he creates this company, and he finds his brother Nikolai, who's still alive, and gets his permission, and he starts selling the rights in Paris. And he gets a couple takers, he gets a little money coming in. Eventually he moves to Nice in Paris, and that's where he's going to live the rest of his days. Now, while he's there, Nice is there's a lot of former Russians living here, settling here. It's kind of a little Russia community. And it turns out Eugenia lived, and she settles there as well. And she takes offense to the fact that he's out here selling that name, because he and Nikolai sold their rights to that name 15 years ago to her husband. Her husband left it to her, and she's like, no, that's mine. Those rights are mine. Like, you don't get to sell that. You don't get to make money on that. Because she's kind of a hateful old woman who just wants a lot of money, and now she's very, very poor, and she is not liking it. So he starts selling it, not doing great, but he does meet this nice lady who he ends up marrying. They have a couple kids. It works out pretty well, I think. She's my favorite out of all of his wives. Not that my opinion makes a difference. So, Tatiana, another Tatiana. It turns out there's like 6 names in Russia, and you just like choose between those 6. She tried to claim it, but she didn't have any money for a lawyer, and she didn't have any evidence that they sold away their stuff, because obviously she can't go back to Russia, and nobody can find the records because it's a disaster. So, 1933, he's in and out of the hospital. He really, really wants to leave something for his friends and for his family. He does not want to leave them destitute. So he puts out an ad in this Russian circular, this Russian paper, and he says, hey, I'm selling it. I'm selling all the rights. It's a great name. You're going to be able to use the 4 seals. You're going to be able to use the purveyor title. Like, hit me up. I'm selling. And he gets no takers except for, and this is where we start to get into a little more modern day, right? That was 1933. Except for a gentleman called Rudolph P. Kunit, who was born in Russia. He happened to be out of Russia when the revolution happened, so he was just like, oh, shit, guess I can't go back. His father was actually a plantation owner who provided almost all of the base, the bread wine, to the Smirnoffs. They would have had a connection there. But, so he sees this and he goes, oh, shit. The Smirnoffs, like the opportunity to buy that name, to work with that name, and it's right at the end of American Prohibition. So he arrived in 1920, right at the start of Prohibition. So right as it was finishing in 1933, he sees the ad and he immediately goes to France and he's like, oh my God, like you are my brother, like we are of the same people. It is an honor to work with you. I would love to buy your name and I would love to use it in America and create this wonderful new opportunity. So he buys the name and he starts trying to sell it. And he opened his first vodka factory in Bethel, Connecticut. And he stayed very connected with Vladimir. He sort of considered it like the living stamp of authenticity. Like if Vladimir Smirnoff is alive and tries my products and is on my board, then this is truly a Smirnoff endeavor. This is truly Smirnoff. But unfortunately, very soon after that, Vladimir dies. So now he's left, but whatever, like no big deal. He's doing his best, but by 1939, so 5 years later, he's on the brink of bankruptcy. He's like, I know it's there, I know I can make it happen, but it's just not quite taking off. So he sells the rights to a gentleman called John Martin, who happens, the company that he works for is the owner of A1 Steak Sauce. At the time, that was like their only like money-making endeavor. And he sells it for $14,000. And John Martin makes Kunit the president of this new subsidiary, and he gives him a 5% royalty on all cases he sells. So he's got incentive to keep this going. And then eventually, right, there's this whole thing, one of the local marketers started marketing it as a white whiskey, no taste, no smell. That helped it a little bit. It starts growing, it's doing pretty good, and then World War II hits. And production cuts off. Like grain is for feeding soldiers, it is not for making alcohol. Like we do not have time for that right now. So like it stalls a little bit during World War II, but it's not the end of the world. It's still doing okay. And then in 1946, this is where it really happens. This is like the birth of vodka in the United States. So Martin meets up with a friend. His name is Jack Morgan, and he is the owner of Cock and Bull Restaurant, a very famous nightclub. A lot of stars went there. And Cock and Bull Restaurant just started serving this new ginger beer. And Jack Morgan was trying to make it catch on. He's like, this is my brand of ginger beer. I gotta make it happen. It's super popular in Britain, but nobody knows of it over here. And they come together and they have this idea, well, let's do this drink. Let's put our vodka in the ginger beer, throw a little lime in there. And Jack Morgan's girlfriend makes like copper stuff. Like that's her thing, is she just makes copper stuff to sell. and she makes this copper mug, and then that is the birth of the Moscow Mule. And then they do this fantastic marketing campaign where they would go into a bar and they would show the bartender how to make it, and they would take 2 pictures. They would take a picture of the bartender making the drink. They would give 1 copy of that to the bartender, be like, hey, this is a keepsake, like, remember me, think about me, put it in the corner, whatever. And then they would take that 2nd copy and they would go to the bar next door and be like, this is your neighbor, and they're making this hot new drink that people want, and you're falling behind the times, like, you don't know what's up. So it's this incredible grassroots campaign. and then they start, like, really dumping the marketing dollars into it. They're the first liquor brand to really use celebrity endorsements. Any celebrity they could get their hands on, they're like, you drink this, you take a picture with it. And then they got into the Bond movies, and that's what really, really set it off. When the Bond movies grabbed the heart of the American people, there was a bottle of Smirnoff vodka in the other hand. So that's when it really took off, and it just threw in. And then basically since the 1970s, it's more or less been the best-selling liquor category in the United States. And then back home, the Smirnoff family was more or less dying. Yeah, pretty much. Right, so dying in poverty, everything's going really poorly, some people are arrested, and then in the 1980s, right, so Smirnoff, the brand, started to get really big, and then in the 1980s, the family got together and they said, one of the grandsons, Oleg, started doing research. He was like, hey, that's my name, like, that's my great-grandfather's business, like, why is this random-ass American company using my father's name and our labels? Like, that's not right. And more importantly, I want a piece of that. So he starts doing all this research, and that's where all the information in this book comes from, is Oleg's research. And, you know, he does all this research, and then the family sues in Germany. They say, hey, you know, this implies that it's made there. This implies that you're a purveyor to the court. Like, you're not. You don't deserve to use this stuff. And they basically win in that the German court is like, all right, fine, we'll make it more clear that it's made in Germany. But they don't really win anything. They try... yeah. It gets complicated. Basically, there's just this long legal lawsuit. At one point, this guy named Boris is like leading the charge on, you know, we're gonna get back our great-grandfather's name, and we're gonna get the rights in Russia, and then we can capitalize on everything they've done. His other partner, also Boris, sells his pieces to in their newly formed company. He sells his rights to this big Russian company, and then when the big Russian company, like, their shareholders try to show up to the shareholder meeting, the guy, like, bars the doors, and he has guards out front, and they have to come back with police officers to get let into the company, and they're, like, breaking windows, and the workers inside are throwing, like, Molotov cocktails out the windows. And this guy, Boris, is sitting in there, like, inside the factory, like, no, I won't leave. Like, no, you can't make me. You don't deserve to be here. It's so dramatic. It's so needlessly dramatic. And, you know, and eventually they do more or less lose the rights. Diageo is the owner at the time. I believe they're still the owner now. And they argue, they're like, look, it was a purchase made in good faith 30, 40, 50 years ago, and it wouldn't even be worth having if we didn't put all of this money into it. Like, all these guys want is a big payout, and we're not going to do it because they didn't do anything and they don't deserve it. So, trouble within the family starts. Eventually, Diageo and this big new company come to a settlement, and now they can distribute in Russia. And the family, more or less, I mean, there's like 60 great-grandkids and whatever at this point. So they're just, half of them are like, this is fucking embarrassing. Like, you're ruining our great-grandfather's good name. He did all this work, and you're making us, like, you're embarrassing us. We don't want to be a part of this. And then there's, like, these two dudes who are just like, we deserve all this money, and they are being very embarrassing. I assume they just get fucked. It doesn't really say but I got the impression after they attacked the police, he probably spent some time in jail. And it's harder to fight legal battles from jail. So, you're welcome for almost 2 fucking hours of knowing what happens to the Smirnoff family. In my defense, this is a 2-hour video, but in my defense, it took me like probably 6 months to finally slog my way through the whole book, because I would get bored and like go do something else instead. And I also took 15 pages of notes on this book, and like you guys got the Cliff Notes version with cussing. She doesn't cuss in there, so it's not as exciting, so you might as well just listen to this video. But thank you. If you made it all the way through, that's very impressive. I don't expect it, but it's very exciting, and I'm glad you did, and I hope you like it. And I really encourage you to look up the book. Check it out. There's, like I said, it provides wonderful context for everything. Oh, I put that on backwards. It does a great job, and I strongly recommend it. If you're interested in Russian history, if you're interested in, oh, Cox, it had this whole cast thing right in the beginning. Oh, that's useful. Oh, I should have, fuck me. Oh, obviously I didn't read it that well. And it's actually signed by the author. I got this at Bookman's, and I like didn't even think about it. And then I opened it up, and I opened to like the main page, and somebody had written in it, and I'm like, who the fuck writes in that first section there? Like, what a weird spot to write in. And then I realized that it was the name of the lady right above it, so it's the name of the author. So whoever Michael was who got this book, thanks. Thanks for getting it signed, and then thanks for donating it when you decided you didn't want it anymore, because I reaped the benefits, and now you too, YouTube viewer, are reaping the benefits if you made it this far. This is a really, really long video. I should break it up or something. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope this was exciting for you. It was exciting for me. And just for the record, I can show you guys a little bit of what I've been talking to. My mom told me the other day that all the best YouTubers, they don't look, or all the best videos, not just YouTube, is that you don't look right at the camera because that makes people uncomfortable. So what I did today is I tried to look to the side of the camera. Apparently it's more professional. People feel more comfortable that way because eye contact is bad and we don't like it. So this was my setup for today. This is what I've been talking to. So that's my little bear in his little bear sweater. So just so you know, if it looks like I was smiling at you and you felt really personal there for a minute, I wasn't smiling at you. I was smiling at a bear in a sweater, and you're just no bear in a sweater. Sorry, guys. So I will talk at you another time. Hopefully I'll have some updates on the business soon, and I can tell you all about zoning in the city of Phoenix and finding locations that are appropriate for opening your business, because we are all going to be riveted by that. So thank you. I will talk at you next time.